started, I would love for all the performers to come on stage and be acknowledged. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn this music and play for us today. Thank you, Dr. Clark, for conducting. We could not accomplish this without your leadership and guidance. I would also like to thank my dissertation committee, Dr. Green, Dr. Robinson, Professor Juliana Nickel, and my chair, Dr. Owens. All of you have been so supportive of me and this project. I appreciate all the time and patience, especially Dr. Owens, for answering my questions and encouraging me in my efforts every week. Thank you, family, for being here today and every day, and for those of you watching. My Ives journey began when I took Dr. Owens' class on Ives and his chamber music in the fall of 2018. I went to Yale University to look at Ives' manuscripts, read letters between him and other musicians, and listen to rare recordings of his music. I stumbled across Yale Reports, an interview of Jim Sinclair in 1974, introducing each piece from this record, Old Songs Deranged, music for theater orchestra. 13 premieres of Ives' chamber works, celebrating the centenary of his birth. Mr. Sinclair conducted the Yale Theater Orchestra for this recording, an ensemble including Ives scholars Kenneth Singleton, Vivian Perlis, and John Kirkpatrick. The song Mists immediately drew me in. Is that a flute? Why is the range so low? What is a theater orchestra? There was something mysterious and extremely vulnerable about the flute's voice as it floated through the strings, alternating whole-tone harmonies. These are the mists at Elk Lake in the Adirondacks that Harmony, Ives' wife, would have seen when she composed this poem to grieve her mother's unexpected death in 1910. On a staff, this is what Ives' musical mists look like, played by the strings. Oscillating whole-tone scales create ambiguity. Like the physical mists at Elk Lake, present but transparent, we cannot grasp the tonal center. Triple piano dynamics contribute to the mystery. The music is static as the treble and bass move back and forth in contrary motion. The flute is Harmony's voice, written in a medium vocal range outlining the key of G major. The lyrics dictate how the melodic line moves narrowly down to mist and upwards to del. A pedal tone G in the double bass grounds it. The simple tonal melody in the low range of the flute comes through the texture while blending with the strings timbres. I took these pictures the morning of August 16th, 2021, and the music is from my recital last April. Here is Mists. never heard a flute solo like this before. When an orchestra accompanies a flutist, I expect the solo will be like one of the Mozart concertos, the Bach Suite in D minor, or the Ibert, something virtuosic with several movements lasting 20 minutes. This lasts only 1 minute 35 seconds. Now I was curious, what else did Ives write for the flute? What would have influenced his thoughts about the flute? Where would he have heard the flute? What kind of ensembles were flutists in? What music did they play? Before I could begin answering these questions, I needed to know what research had been done already. The primary sources gave me a framework of dates, events, and relationships to place Ives' music into. The biographies present an ever-changing perspective about Ives and his music. However, all agree upon the strong correlation between Ives' life experiences and his compositions. Budiansky claims Ives wanted to capture these important life moments forever in sound, like oral photographs. The essays and analyses delve specifically into one aspect of Ives' music. Each gave me examples and ways to do my own analysis, but from a flutist perspective. They also led me to several hypotheses about how theater orchestras impacted Ives' compositions. Out of the many dissertations written about Ives and his music, these three were the most closely related to my project. Vistano's dissertation about the trumpet was especially pertinent because he discusses the flute's timbre, associations with his father's George and Thoreau, and how the flute interacts with the trumpet. What was missing from the literature was a study about the flute in Ives' chamber music. Another hole I found in the literature was a lack of discussion about theater orchestras and the tremendous impact they had on Ives' music. After finding flute and piccolo in George's theater orchestra, but only D-flat piccolo in his band, I felt discussing the flute within the context of the theater orchestra would be the most effective. Music today is challenging. Sound is explored in all kinds of ways. Dissonance is the norm. Our minds and ears have finally caught up to Ives. I hope this study helps in understanding Ives, makes his music more accessible, and encourages future performances. During my trips to the Gilmore Music Library and music manuscripts and archives at Yale, I had the opportunity to look at Ives' manuscripts, read letters, and examine programs. Thank you to all the librarians who rolled out the red carpet for me, especially Richard Bursey and Suzanne Lovejoy. At the Danbury Museum, Patrick Wells and Bridget Gerton aided me with the microfilm for the Danbury News, a wealth of information about the music Ives would have heard growing up in Danbury. In 2018, Jim Sinclair gave me the awesome idea to write about the flute in Ives' music. Thank you, Mr. Sinclair, for all your encouragement and time, answering a multitude of questions and providing me with music for both of my recitals. Jonathan Elkis is an expert in band and has made several arrangements of Ives' music. I greatly appreciate his insight about the Marine Band, which led me to several discoveries. I am so thankful for the musicians today and last spring who have performed Ives' music so that audience could hear it and we could have the experience learning it. One of my goals of the study was to play as much of the chamber music as possible. I focused only on music that contained the flute. Chamber music with piccolo or both flute and piccolo was not considered. Size of the ensemble could not be greater than 14, with no more than 9 total strings. Lastly, music with optional flute parts was not considered. Today, as we listen to the music, I would like to talk about 4 main topics. Associations Ives made with the flute, be it a person, place, or thing, what a theater orchestra was and its impact on Ives' music, how Ives creates a scene using compositional techniques for a musical effect, the flute-trumpet relationship in the music, and the vocal connection. Practically every story about Charles Ives begins with his father, George. George's first instrument was the flute. He also played violin and basset horn, but his main instrument was the cornet. Here he is pictured in his Danbury bandmaster's uniform. Moss Ives, Charles's younger brother, also played the flute. At age 13 for Christmas, December 1887, Charles composed the Holiday Quickstick March at the piano. Here is Charles at age 14, just a year later. George helped Ives orchestrate Holiday Quickstep for piccolo, 2 trumpets, 2 violins, and piano. This was father and son's first collaboration together, an extremely positive experience, with George's orchestra premiering the work January 16, 1888, at the Taylor Opera House in Danbury. On December 25, 1888, the piece was performed again at the Methodist Sunday School with Moss on piccolo, George on his cornet, and Charles at the piano. In May 1888, another arrangement was made for the Danbury Band marching in the Decoration Day Parade. Because this was Ives' first work for theater orchestra, we performed Holiday Quickstep in my Ives recital in 2022. Here is the end, with Ives quoting Reeves's 2nd Regiment Connecticut March in the cornets, a shared favorite between him and George. From this initial positive experience with the theater orchestra, several results occur. First, Ives chooses to compose a march, a kind of music most closely associated with bands, who play music outside for picnics, parades, processions, serenades, and concerts in the park. I think this is why he chooses the piccolo instead of the flute to pair with the trumpet. Here is a picture of the Danbury Band. Although the picture is not dated, Ives' march, intercollegiate with the song Annie Lyle, composed in 1892, bears the exact instrumentation as this picture, with D-flat piccolo, not flute. Second, Ives learns from his father how to arrange and orchestrate for various ensembles from his original piano work. At the turn of the 20th century, this is what band directors did: take popular music, songs sung in the parlor with piano, and arrange them for their bands, with solo cornet playing the lead melody. George also arranged this music for dances with his standard orchestra and for the theater. Songs were chosen appropriately for the occasion and arranged for whatever ensemble was needed. Holiday Quickstep was a family affair performed by both brothers with their dad. How fun would that be, as a 13-year-old, performing your composition with your dad and brother, and also having George's theater orchestra and band play it to rave reviews from the Danbury News. Master Ives is certainly a musical genius, being an accomplished performer on several instruments, as well as composer and arranger. The Holiday Quickstep is worthy of place of productions of much older heads, and Master Charlie should be encouraged to further efforts in this line. We shall expect more from this talented youngster in the future. Ives' March No. 2, composed in 1892, contains the song Son of a Gambolier, which you will hear in the 2nd strain, played by the trumpet. Ives later made a piano vocal arrangement in 1895, tailoring the lyrics to his liking. A gambolier is someone who skips and frolics about, having fun irresponsibly. For all the music, I will have a slide with the lyrics so you can hear the words of the song while the melody is being played. George would teach the chorus and vocalists at camp meetings this way, by playing the melody on his cornet to hear the intervals, phrasing, dynamics, and overall emotion he wanted them to express. In our theater orchestra, we are using the modern trumpet, even though the part was composed for cornet, another reminder of American cornet bands at the turn of the 20th century. Initially, the flute plays in unison with the trumpet. However, on the repeats, which are obligatos, the flute plays up an octave in the range of a piccolo. Another association Ives would make with the flute is the organ. By the time he began at Yale, Ives already had 6 years' experience as a professional organist. Located conveniently across the street from his dormitory on the New Haven Green, he continued this work at Center Church with mentor John Griggs. The Organist in Ives by Burkholder discusses how Ives, engaging stops with 2 separate manuals and the foot pedals, could experiment with the timbres of an orchestra on 3 separate planes of sound. It is here at the organ he may have discovered a preference for the sound combination of a flute stop from a flute pipe and a trumpet stop from a reed pipe. Fugue in 4 keys on the Shining Shore, written in 1896, was the first time Ives paired flute and trumpet in this way. Editor John Kirkpatrick says the Fugue began as a string quartet, but soon became string orchestra with trumpet, flute, and possibly organ, though no organ part now exists. We will play for you the second major section of the piece, starting at measure 59. The tempo from the Fugue in the first section is slowed to half its speed, to allow for a procession of 2 hymns, The Shining Shore, paraphrased by the trumpet in the key of A major, and Asmund, played in its entirety in the key of G major by the flute. The flute playing in its lowest register follows like the trumpet's shadow. The swells and the strings moving forward and backward support the feeling of a processional. On November 5th, 1894, the fall of Ives' freshman year at Yale, George dies suddenly of a stroke at the age of 49. Reading Thoreau brings Ives peace after George's death. Thoreau, playing his flute at Walden Pond, causes Ives to associate the flute with water. Ives meets Harmony Twitchell in 1896 when close friend Dave Twitchell invites him to the Adirondacks of New York for a rest cure. Ives meets Harmony again in the Adirondacks in 1905. Anxious over the uncertainty of his life, Harmony's calm demeanor restores Ives, and they begin a long, formal courtship. Ives associates Harmony with the Adirondacks because it's where they met, and her love for nature and poetry connects her to the beauty there. Harmony becomes Ives' next collaborator and the major influence in his life. She supports and encourages him to share his memories of George with her. The Pond from 1906 is an elegy. Ives describes the work as one obvious picture, an echo piece. Associating George with Thoreau and his flute playing at Walden Pond, Ives pairs solo trumpet and flute together. Playing in the high register at a piano dynamic, the flute is now a soaring echo instead of a shadow to the trumpet song. The listener is brought into the scene with the piano, strings, and bells, each playing different divisions of the beat. Layered rhythms distort the sense of time. Ives is recalling his memory of George standing at one side of the pond, playing his cornet, while Charles, standing on the other side, would listen to the sound echoing over the water. In the score, Ives says, unless the string orchestra is large, it is better, if possible, that the flute part be played off stage, to suggest the echo over a pond. Ives describes the spatial effects he wants for the flute sound to take more time to reach the audience. A piano dynamic is not enough. Having physical distance gives listeners a more accurate experience of the actual sound Ives heard. At the end, the flutist quickly switches to piccolo to play a fragment of taps, reminiscent of a fife in George's Civil War band. Just as Ives continued playing organ professionally during college, he became involved with theater orchestras. Playing piano at the Hyperion in New Haven gave Ives the opportunity to be part of the ensemble. Frank Fitchell, Hyperion's orchestra leader, supported and encouraged Ives to try out his music. Although Ives never says outright, being in the theater environment may have influenced the way he composed chamber music. In the memos, Ives recalls writing short overtures, marches, brass band pieces, and short orchestra pieces for Hyperion's orchestra. Musicians were open to new music because they were learning new music every week or two for the next production. They were also flexible and able to cover whatever parts were necessary. Ives had the opportunity to hear his music and determine what instrumental sounds and rhythms worked for the effect he was trying to achieve. He could experiment with several musicians playing independent parts beyond his playing the organ at Center Church. He goes on to say, some had old tunes, college songs, hymns, etc., sometimes putting these themes or songs together in 2 or 3 different key counterpoints and sometimes 2 or 3 different kinds of time and key. On the back of the Cage, Movement 1, a set for theater orchestra, Ives provides a clear description of theater orchestras at this time. The makeup of the average theater orchestra of some years ago depended somewhat on what players and instruments happened to be around. Its size would run from 4 or 5 to 15 or 20, and the 4 or 5 often had to do the job of 20 without getting put out. Its scores were subject to makeshifts and were often written with that in mind. There were usually 1 or 2 treble woodwinds, a trombone, a cornet, sometimes a saxophone, strings, piano, and a drum. Often an octave of high bells or a xylophone. Another work Ives wrote for theater orchestra was the unanswered question, though full symphony orchestras perform it most often. Playable with only 9 players, Ives pairs the trumpet with a flute quartet and a string quartet. He gives the option for an oboe and clarinet to play flutes 3 and 4, an oboe for the trumpet, though I've never heard it that way, and full string orchestra. Flexible scoring was necessary, not knowing what players or instruments would be available. Like the pond, Ives provides the story with instructions on how to create the musical effect. He tells the strings, flutes, and solo trumpet to be spaced apart from each other so the audience receives the sound from 3 distinct distances. In this excerpt, the solo trumpet has just asked his atonal perennial question of existence for the 5th time. The strings are playing a tonal ostinato representing the silences of the druids who know, see, and hear nothing. The flute's conversation becomes more active with notes higher in range, louder dynamics, and at a faster tempo. Next, they jump down to hold all minor seconds, low C, D flat, D, and E flat, what Ives calls their secret conference. The trumpet asks the same question, and the flutes, or fighting answers, are now thoroughly annoyed. They launch into their last heated contrapuntal response, faster, higher, and louder. I wanted to find evidence of the instrumentation and size of theater orchestras, especially at the Hyperion, when Ives was at Yale. Looking at programs from New Haven and New York theaters beginning in 1896, I noticed several things. Musicians were never listed. An orchestra's name or their leader would sometimes be mentioned. Incidental music or musicals would acknowledge the composer. The format for all followed the same general outline. The top mentions the producer and company involved, in this case, Charles Ives. The type of show, burlesque. Title, Excelsior Jr. Lyricist and composer are acknowledged. Of great importance was scenery, which was always advertised. This show is presented with entirely new scenery, magnificent costumes, and the following cast of characters. Charles Frohman's comedians present Never Again, a comedy in 3 acts. The cast has descriptions of who they are and how they are related to one another. In Never Again, Vignon is an artist and Marceline is his wife. Last will be a synopsis of scenery describing the place. For Excelsior Jr., Act 1, Switzerland in the snow. Act 2, on the Alps. Act 3, Chamonix, the Rococo Salon in the Grand Hotel. Sometimes each act will be broken down into several different scenes in another place or another time of day. Entertainment happens between acts to allow time to set up the scenery. For this show, Mr. Seymour Hess will give his celebrated imitation of John Philip Sousa and conduct the orchestra in one of his compositions. As you listen, think of each set as an act from a play and each movement as a separate scene. Every movement has its own title. There are only 4 movements out of 11 sets that do not have corresponding songs with piano accompaniment, also written by Ives. The lyrics of the songs are based on poems that I think are related to important moments in Ives' life or inspired him. Sometimes Ives writes his own lyrics. There is a solo instrument in each, sometimes a duet, singing the words of the song. Ives calls these songs with or without voices. Innovative compositional techniques are used to create the desired effect for the scene. Movements were written at various times and gathered into sets later. As a result, instrumentation is different for each one, but usually there are 1 to 2 treble woodwinds. Like potpourris, the styles in each movement contrast and use timbres to emphasize the story. In a lecture, Ives brings us into the hall with the strings. the students shuffling their feet. A low humming of voices. Bassoon and trombone are two professors directing the students to take their seats. The trumpet is Arthur Twining Hadley, the president of Yale, speaking. Here are the trumpet and flute parts. Like a student raising her hand, the flute voices a high E natural. Ives uses the flute as an underlying inquisitive voice, placing its range within the trumpets, but its rhythm different from everyone else's. Tritones occur because of the flute. They are circled in purple. The intervals between the trumpet and the flute are in constant flux from major to minor as thoughts are exchanged. The red lines show all of the interplay between major seconds and minor seconds. At the end, when everyone is in unison, they still can't decide what interval is better. Trumpet gets in the last word, exclaiming, "My own," with a major second. English horn is the next solo voice in Like a Sick Eagle. Ives composed this work in 1913, but related it to April 1909 when Harmony had a miscarriage late in her pregnancy and had an emergency hysterectomy. At the top of the score, he writes, HTI in hospital, Sally singing. Only 4 strings are used to emphasize the desolation. An 8th note ostinato begins in the cello with violin entering, sliding between notes, crying, 1 8th note later. A churning effect begins with the intervals between all the 8th notes contracting and expanding without resolution. Flute entering in measure 7 follows the English horn's chromaticism in the red bracket, playing the same notes just 1 8th note after. The wind's equivalent to the churning in the strings. The line ascends with the lyrics pinnacle and steep. A tritone in the flute begins the whole tone melody, which I think is Sally, Harmony's sister, singing. At the end, the red bracket shows flute following downwards chromatically. The ascending GAB with the words toward the sky gives us hope, outlining G major, C's dominant. With Allegretto sombreoso, also called the incantation, Ives is attempting to cast a spell on us. The music is repetitive like a chant. The arpeggio like ostinato in the piano shifts where the accent is, so time is suspended. There is constant motion similar to a wave moving toward the shore. The violins foreshadow the solo English horn singing the song. As the solo's line moves upwards, the violins move downwards. The blue brackets show the flute playing the ostinato, and the red where the violin takes over. Ives shifts the number of sixteenths each instrument plays, so the beat cannot be determined where the flute ends and where the violin begins, like the moon's reflection on the water. Andante, the Last Reader, dated June 4th, 1911, is presumably dedicated to Harmony because this is her birthday. The Rainbow in Set 6 was also a birthday dedication. Both pieces were played by the organ first, which is why the flutes are in perfect fourths and fifths. Ives played them with his right hand with string and diapason stops. Improvising on the organ with hymn tunes, Ives would add shadow lines, in this piece played by the viola. Ives uses the flutes to unify and organize the form. Two flutes set the scene with a broken F major chord. The trumpet interrupts, and they quickly follow. The green arrows show how the flute's notes come closely after the trumpets until they meet on the B flat and F on the downbeat of the 4/4. Ives slightly truncates the flute's second entrance and shifts everything later one beat. We are reminded of the beginning when they return, a memory, as the lyrics of the second hymn, Noah, by Haydn suggests, circled in red. Second flute echoes the first. At the end, Ives raises the flute's descending line a half step, echoing the trumpet's last verse in A major. Ives lived in New York City and worked in the life insurance business half his time, the other half in West Reading, Connecticut, composing. He seemed to love the sounds of the city, having written Scherzo over the pavements for chamber ensemble, imitating the various layers of traffic he heard out his window overlooking Central Park. Ann Street begins with a grand Broadway-style intro in the piano, the trombone reinforcing the bass, the flute the uppermost notes. The strings join in the piano's chords and play with it throughout. Each phrase is a contrasting style of music, with various meters, tempos, ragtime prevalent, reflecting the words of the poem. Ives pairs At Sea with Swimmers, The Pond, and Full Fathom 5 for Set 7, Watercolors. The set as a whole connects life and death with the imagery of water. Swimmers compares life's excitement with conquering the waves or being swept under by them. At Sea is a journey to find love. Musically, it most closely resembles Mists. They are both flute solos with strings and bells, but for Set 3's arrangement of At Sea, called Three Poems of Robert Underwood Johnson, Ives chooses the English horn for the solo, reinforcing Ives's association with the flute and water for this set. Full Fathom 5 refers to a watery grave. Conclusions. Flute plays a significant role in Ives's chamber music. Ives uses the flute in a variety of ways depending on who or what he associates the flute with: people, instruments, places, and things. Flute is used as a tone color, an echo, a means to create tension, as a soloist in a quartet, as a supporting voice paired with trumpet or English horn. Important life events or inspirational moments motivated Ives to compose both vocal songs with piano accompaniment and theater orchestra arrangements of those songs. Having the support of the theater orchestra allowed Ives to experiment with independent parts using chromaticism, layering, polyrhythms, expanding, contracting intervals, spatial effects, and timbres. Being in the theater environment may have influenced the way he thought about music, in creating scenes with musical effects. Coming full circle, Jim Sinclair and his orchestra in New England, who started as the Yale Theater Orchestra, just released the recording of the complete sets for Chamber Orchestra this past June, marking 50 years since the 13 premieres for theater orchestra in 1974. Here's my bibliography. Hopefully the study helps in understanding Ives, his music, and encourages more live performances. Thank you.
It was so much fun to present my research with you.